Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. A year ago, 4 cardinals asked the Pope to clarify his pastoral teaching regarding communion for divorced and civilly remarried Catholics. Their request went unanswered. This week, those same 4 cardinals renewed their request for dialogue and clarity from the Pope. One of the reporters who broke the story is with us tonight. He joins us from Rome via satellite. He's the Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Register, Edward Pentin. Edward, thanks for being there. I want to jump right into this letter. Now, this comes from Cardinal Caffarra, and he writes on behalf of Cardinal Brandmüller, Cardinal Raymond Burke, Cardinal Meisner, Joachim Meisner, and himself. And he writes, "It is with some trepidation that I address myself to Your Holiness during these days of the Easter season." This letter went out in May. "We wish to begin by renewing our absolute dedication and our unconditional love for the Chair of Peter and for your august person, in whom we recognize the successor of Peter and the vicar of Jesus, the sweet Christ on earth," as St. Catherine of Siena was fond of saying. "We do not share in the slightest the position of those who consider the see of Peter vacant." I want to start there. Why, at the beginning of this letter, have what is essentially a reiteration of their fidelity to the Pope?
Well, Raymond, it's really because they're very keen to obviously do this out of respect and love for the Petrine ministry and for the Pope. They really are, that's their first concern. And so that's why they put it at the top. And they want to keep the channels of dialogue open with the Holy Father. They don't want to discredit him in any way or make him feel humiliated in any way. They just want to do this out of love for him and out of deep concern for what they call the grave situation in the Church due to the conflicting readings of Amoris Laetitia in bishops' conferences around the world.
Yeah, I want to put this up so the audience can see it, and this is really the marrow of their letter. Cardinal Caffarra writes on behalf of his brother cardinals, the 3 other cardinals, on September 19th, 2016, we delivered to Your Holiness and to the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith 5 dubia, those are questions, asking you to resolve uncertainties and to bring clarity on some points of the post-synodal apostolic exhortation Amoris Laetitia. Not having received any response from Your Holiness, we have reached the decision to ask you respectfully and humbly for an audience. Together, if Your Holiness would like, we attach, as is the practice, an audience sheet in which we present the 2 points we wish to discuss with you. Okay, why make this public now, Edward Pentin? Even Cardinal Müller, the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, whom I interviewed a few weeks ago, said some of this public conversation is discomforting to the Pope and rattles the Church and might be seen as being provocative. Your take?
Well, I think the first thing, Raymond, is that they're frustrated at not getting any response from the Holy Father at all about it. But also, I think they're just very keen, obviously, to get an answer because, as I said earlier, they're very concerned about what they're hearing from the parishes, the confusion that there is, and the salvation of souls, which is at stake. And so they feel that if they make this public, it'll answer a lot of the public's, the faithful's concerns, and it'll show that actually the cardinals are doing something and try and reassure them in that. So there's a sort of a two-pronged reason, two reasons here for doing it.
Edward, and we're talking to Edward Pentin of the National Catholic Register. You've reported in recent days and have been covering this really for the last year. We've been seeing individual bishops, cardinals, and now bishops' conferences around the world weighing in on their interpretation of Amoris Laetitia and, on a finer point, whether to grant and under what circumstances to grant communion to divorced and civilly remarried Catholics without an annulment. Now, the Belgian bishops and the German bishops and the Philippine bishops and the Maltese bishops say you can rely on your conscience, and if you're accompanied by your priest, you can go to communion. We now have the Polish bishops this past week, their bishops' conference, saying no, Amoris Laetitia does not change church teaching in the least. Is this what's brought this situation to a head? The discontinuity and the division between one country's bishops' conference and another over this core teaching of the Church?
It is, because what they're concerned about, and not just the cardinals, but a theologian I talked to as well, is that they think there's a sort of apostasy going on, because apostasy creates division, and they're saying that this is why you're getting these conflicting views from bishops' conferences around the world. And obviously they obviously want that settled, and their biggest concern, I think, is that they see Christ as the unifier, Christ as unity, and if there isn't that unity, then there's something wrong, and they want that resolved. And that, for them, what is wrong is this lack of clarity in Amoris Laetitia, which they feel the Pope can only the Pope can resolve by making it clear.
And Edward, why is there a reluctance, do you think, on the part of Pope Francis? I mean, clearly he had their initial dubia. Now this new letter is being made public this week. Why the reluctance to react and to respond to something that seems so elementary? What does the Church teaching about communion for divorced and remarried Catholics without an annulment?
Well, there are a number of theories for this, Raymond, but I think the main one is that he wants this ambiguity, because he says that these issues aren't black and white, and these issues have to be dealt with individually, case by case, and not everyone can receive communion. Not everyone who's divorced and remarried can receive communion, but some can, depending on the circumstances and their path of discernment. So he's keeping this purposely, I think, ambiguous, so that these cases he thinks can be dealt with in that way. But the critics will say that goes against previous papal teachings, because Familiaris Consortio, for example, Pope John Paul II's apostolic exhortation on the family was quite clear about this, and it was very much black and white in many ways. So they're saying there's a rupture with that, and it's a rupture with all the teaching that went before.
Mm-hmm. Do you see this this story, the Cardinals trying to get the Pope to react on this issue of marriage, what it means, the sacrality of marriage? Do you see it in any way tied to the Pope's reformation, if you will, of the Pontifical Academy of Life, where he dismissed all the members? He just appointed 45 new members, among them 3 individuals, one of them a priest, one a rabbi, and the other an academic, all of whom support either contraception, stem cell research, or abortion in some cases. What's the thinking here?
Well, this is really about the Pope having dialogue with other people of other faiths, and bringing in other people who think differently. This is all part of his view. He said only a few years ago that he doesn't believe in certain non-negotiable values. He thinks all values are non-negotiable, and yet he wants dialogue with other people to try and search for truth, and that everything is sort of in flow for him. So that's why he's done that. It's rather odd, though, because I interviewed Archbishop Plea, the head of the Academy, and he reassured readers that there would be people on the Academy who would be in conformity with the Church's teaching and defend and promote it on life issues. So people are scratching their heads as why he's appointed 3 members who are actually don't conform to the Church's teaching on these issues.
Yeah, well, there was once a commitment that one had to sign on to, which demonstrated that you agreed with the Church teaching, and that made you a part of the Pontifical Academy for Life, mainly that you support the Church teaching on life. The Pope did away with that note of confirmation, that oath, if you will.
He did, and that's why I asked Archbishop Plea, does that weaken or effectively neuter the Academy? And he said that answer, that no, it doesn't. In fact, he thinks it's stronger, because the new members of the Academy will have to be in conformity with the Church's magisterium automatically, but that's clearly not the case with a few of these new members.
Yeah. Before I let you go, given what you just said about Archbishop Paglia saying this is the Pope's attempt to dialogue with those who don't even agree with the Church on issues like life, why the reluctance to dialogue with his own cardinals on something as elementary as marriage, do you think? And do you think this letter, making it public, will initiate the dialogue that those 4 cardinals have been begging for the last year?
Well, this is the irony, Raymond, because he does want a dialogue with everybody else, it seems, but not his own cardinals, who have a real problem with the faith and trying to uphold the orthodoxy of the faith. So that is of great concern to many of the cardinals, I understand, not just the 4 who are the dubia 4, if you like. Well, whether he will respond to this, it's anyone's guess, but it seems unlikely at this stage.
Edward Pentin, thank you as always for your reporting, your insight, for breaking this story. And you can catch all of Edward's articles at ncregister.com. Now with reaction, we are joined from New York by a member of the papal posse, canon lawyer and parish priest in the New York Archdiocese. Father GERALD Murray joins us from New York. Father Jerry, thanks for being here.
Great to be here, Raymond.
I want to read you a little line from this letter that we've been referencing. Again, these are the four cardinals who issued those dubia, questions to the Pope, trying to get clarity on Amoris Laetitia. In their new letter that was just made public, they write, "Numerous competent lay faithful who are deeply in love with the Church and staunchly loyal to the Apostolic See have turned to their pastors and to your holiness in order to be confirmed in the holy doctrine concerning the three sacraments of marriage, confession, and the Eucharist. And in these very days in Rome, 6 lay faithful from every continent have presented a very well-attended study seminar with the meaningful title, Bringing Clarity. Faced with this grave situation in which many Christian communities are being divided, we feel the weight of our responsibility, and our conscience impels us to ask humbly and respectfully for an audience." How do you view this, Father, and do you think it will be successful, this effort of these four cardinals?
The reference to the lay faithful is very important, Raymond, because it shows that the cardinals are not simply acting on their own thoughts or concerns. It is well known that people, either privately or publicly, are presenting lots of complaints and doubts about Amoris Laetitia, and these cardinals feel it's their responsibility as advisors to the Pope. You know, the College of Cardinals is the Pope's Senate. Mm-hmm. So they are going to the Pope with this spirit of saying, we bring to you the concerns of the lay faithful, Holy Father. We ask you to allow us to come and hear from you exactly what the true interpretation of Amoris Laetitia is, and how that interpretation, of course, is in conformity with the doctrine of the faith, which is unchangeable. So I'm very pleased that the cardinals are doing this.
Father GERALD Murray, I can almost hear Pope Francis responding now, because every time he's asked about this, he seems to invoke pharisaical individuals who are rigid and attached to their own doctrine, staring inward. Won't he just apply that same lens and say, these are people trying to stop the reform and the Holy Spirit acting through me and through the Church?
Well, we don't know what the Holy Father will say because he hasn't so far answered the dubia, and perhaps he won't grant this audience the request by the cardinals. We do know that he has said to the Argentinian bishops of Buenos Aires region that their interpretation of Amoris Laetitia was correct.
Right.
And that interpretation is not in accord with Catholic doctrine. This is the point that I think we really have to look at here. This is not a question of who's in charge of writing documents and who gets to say what they want. This is a question of what is the faith handed on from the apostles? And it's quite clear. Our Lord said, the man who divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. Adultery is a mortal sin. Those who are living in the state of mortal sin in a public way are to be denied communion by the Church's ministers for their own good, because receiving communion in that situation not only scandalizes other people, it could be imperiling further their salvation. So the unworthy reception of Holy Communion is always a problem. We try to minimize it, try to eliminate it. But the public rejection of the Church's teaching on marriage by getting civilly married cannot be tolerated as a simply minor matter. And I think that's what the cardinals are aiming at.
Father Jerry, that 8th chapter of Amoris Laetitia, just to bring our audience and perhaps those who are new to this controversy or question, the Pope issued this apostolic exhortation, a bit of papal teaching, and in the 8th chapter, he seemed to open the door, at least the language is ambiguous enough, that one can read into it that if you are divorced and remarried without an annulment, with the accompaniment of your priest and a confession, you can go to communion with the person you're now living with and married to. This has caused a lot of confusion, as you said a moment ago, across the Church. I want to point out two things. In the letter, the cardinals mention an audience sheet, which are sort of the menu that they propose for this audience with the Pope. The first thing they say is request for clarification of the 5 points indicated by the dubia, reasons for this request. The second point is the situation of confusion and disorientation, especially among pastors of souls in primis, parish priests. What does that mean?
What it means, Raymond, is that the fact that hierarchies throughout the world are saying that divorced and remarried people can now receive communion is causing parish priests to question whether they should continue the practice that they learned in the seminary based on the teaching of the church and repeated by the previous two pontiffs, that they are not allowed to receive communion. And now we have pressure groups that are arising in the church saying that this has to happen, and this has to happen in a public way. I was scandalized reading about a certain bishop in Argentina who announced publicly that people in his diocese who are not only divorced and remarried, but even those living together without the benefit of marriage, that they could go to communion if they think it's right for them. This is all of moral theology as a whole. We can't separate one from another. So if we can cast aside mortal sin for adultery, well, what other sins are now going to go off that list? And this is where you have lots of problems. This is not a free-for-all religion. This is a religion handed down by the apostles from Christ. If we don't zealously guard it, we're failing in our duty as pastors.
Compare this situation, Father Jerry Murray, the situation that we're seeing now and the slow walk, if you will, in clarifying this Amoris Laetitia, as opposed to the way the Holy See acted when they saw the head of the Order of Malta fired. Compare those two situations to me.
Right, there was a dispute in the Order of Malta between the head of the order and the one who was head of their relief work over the distribution of condoms. And the Grand Master decided that he would fire that subordinate and did so. And then the Holy Father, having been informed of it, overruled the Grand Master and asked him to resign. So what I notice here is that certain issues get direct and immediate attention by the Pope and action is taken. For the cardinals not to get an answer from the Pope, in my mind, is not a good thing. And, you know, the Pope is sovereign. He can do what he wants. But it doesn't make sense in all other areas where you take swift action when problems are brought to you, or you say you want dialogue, which indeed he's engaged in dialogue with a lot of people. Why aren't these cardinals brought in and said, look, I know you're here because you love the church. We all love the church. Let's discuss what's at issue.
Final question. Give me your gut instinct on this. What do you think the papal reaction will be, and how do you think this will play beyond the borders of Catholicism into the wider world? This letter and these cardinals going public, they will no doubt be cast as naysayers, opponents of the Pope, even dissenters.
And of course, they're none of that. They are loyal churchmen. Recall that the Pope, when he came into the pontificate, told the faithful, go out and make a mess. He used the Spanish word lío, which means a mess or an upsetment and all, to get things rattled up. The Pope does that all the time. He creates situations with people a little bit off guard, etc. So when the cardinals come to him and say, look, some of this upsetness is not going in the right direction and we need to deal with it, he might get further upset about it, but remember, the Pope is a servant of Christ, so are you and I, anybody in the church, all the baptized, we're all under the eye of Christ. So we all have to say to ourselves, what would Christ do if a doctrinal question came to him that was of great importance? Would he say to people, look, don't ask questions because the Pope's going to get upset? I don't think so. I think this has to be dealt with, and the cardinals, I approve and very heartily support their effort to get this question clarified.
Father GERALD Murray, thank you for being here. You can find Father Jerry's columns at thecatholicthing.org.